Thank you. What did you all think of that?
It's fascinating.
I'm going to let you all introduce yourselves, say who you are, where you're from, and give a little context around this panel, which is about how new operations processes, including cloud and microservices, will change TV. How are they going to change TV?
Well, my name is Sten Lawaetz. I'm currently head of systems architecture at TDC in Denmark. That means that we are dealing with many of the same problems that Ian has so eloquently described how you have gone through. We are facing those at this point. We have been building microservice-based control planes for some time now, and we've had some learnings from that. So it's not just there are a lot of obstacles to go through before we can get to the benefits of putting things in the cloud and microservice architecture. But we can come back to that.
That's great. Okay.
Yeah, Randolph from Deutsche Telekom, the innovation laboratories, and heading the new media team there. Yeah, we are also thinking how the future production model for TV has to change. Because in the end, we are not talking about single components, but about the complete production model and how it can benefit, let's say, from a cloud-native-based production model. Because we have seen the first wave of virtualization based on Etsy, NFV, and BNF-based, but we see also the limits and some challenges. And at the same time, we are a multi-nut telco. That means we have 12 national business units, so it's also the question about centralization versus local production in a way, so how you mix it, and what are the trade-offs in a hybrid production model, in a way we still keep certain local things for, let's say, cost or legal reasons on the grounds of the national territories. And on the other hand, of course, it's also, I think this is the most essential point, assembling learning cost. And I only can say we also did the same you did, Ian, and nearly arrived at the same conclusions. So it's still some time to go until we really can have, let's say, a really cost-optimized, complete cloudification of every component in the complete service delivery chain of a TV. So it's still some way to go.
Great. Chris?
My name is Linden. I'm responsible for quality and product operations, which means that I'm actually more on the user side of all these services. Within Liberty Global, I'm actually responsible for departments like content operations and metadata, running quality programs, and doing the base management, so CP development on legacy. And I think many of the aspects that have been already mentioned here before are also recognizable for us. Also, we're going through this transformation curve in terms of adopting microservices within our back offices, having to find ways to integrate innovation and legacy in a seamless way. Obviously, we've even invested in cloud platforms, so and all the workflow automation that was also highlighted earlier in terms of VOD content. Is also something that we're kind of working on to find ways to make that more optimal. And I think the key thing there is that, because it's not been touched so far a lot of times, I'm an engineer by background, so I recognize all the diagrams, but I think what's not been resonating enough is that the customer is simply experiencing, again, this anywhere, everywhere, anytime type of experience, which means that we need to find ways to run high quality workflows that can scale and reach that customer whenever he wants to reach the content. So I think some of these developments are really helping us to facilitate that transformation, but to your earlier point, it's not frictionless. There's a lot of implementation issues here.
My name is Clayton Wagar, and I'm from Atlanta, Georgia. Work for Espial, which is a Canadian-based software and services company. Many of you may be familiar with our capabilities around middleware development and user experience, as well as on-premise back office. In the North American market, though, our largest addressable product is Elevate. And Elevate is, in fact, a cloud-based back office. It's used by more than 40 operators across North America. Almost 1 million homes, many millions of devices are powered by the platform. It uses technologies, microservices and cloud are key parts of the value proposition that allow us to give owner economics to tier 2 and tier 3 operators who are increasingly faced with content costs which are untenable. And so that has to come from somewhere, and oftentimes it comes from the tech stack. So we operate that 24/7 on their behalf. It powers experiences on both legacy set-tops over cable QAM and also IP multicast, and now in this year across a wide variety of IP native platforms. And as I said, we'll explore a little more, but the technologies, microservices and cloud are really a key part of what enables us to do that on their behalf.
Okay, well, we're going to talk more with all of you, but also as you're the vendor here, we're going to get your perspective on how that fits in with what they're putting together too. So out of curiosity, as a hands up, who here has actually deployed microservices? Anybody in the room? Okay. Was it successfully? Did you have any problems? Okay. So one of the things that we were talking about before was putting together microservices is not without its issues, and especially with legacy integration. So what are the specific implementation challenges of trying to put together a microservice architecture?
So I think, again, as a user, what I observe is, first of all, we're embracing microservices, and we're obviously also working a lot with Pixel, who's helping us a lot with deploying those microservices. But I think the benefits of indeed doing faster innovation, reducing it, cost, we also see those benefits. But I think one of the challenges that we see with microservices is the kind of the ability to troubleshoot when it goes wrong. You get more components. So previously you had one monolithic system, and you called the vendor and you said, "Hey guys, fix this for us because it's down or whatever." And now you get into kind of having to look at the Splunks and the Dynatraces and of this world to really understand where, in which microservices, the scaling is going wrong or the components are going wrong. So I think, especially on the operational side, there is a bit of cost or kind of a knowledge curve that needs to happen to also understand how to manage these new microservices.
But I think we have to be aware, because if we speak of a cloud native-based production model, there are 3 foundational layers for that model: microservices, containerization, and overall orchestration. And usually what you do is, of course, what you aim at is a high degree of automation. And then the question is, of course, in the microservice part, for how much granularity in service decomposition, vertically and horizontally, should you strive?
Yeah.
Because the more granularity, the more flexible you get in service composition. But the disadvantage is, of course, there might be a lot of operational troubleshooting problems in monitoring, killing these instances, and so on, and finding the right containers and shutting them down.
Yeah.
And I think it's also of high importance, the orchestration layer, because the orchestration layer at the same time is also your service quality management layer. And the key there is also, and I think it's not only a technical challenge what we are facing, it's also a skill challenge, because you need also different people to operate such a cloud native-based, let's say, production model.
Yeah.
And this is also what we find out. It's experience in how to scale, how to heal, how to monitor it, how to troubleshoot it, takes some experience. And especially, it's not everything is there already in the vendor solutions.
So I think we both agree on that point. Yeah. The question is obviously how within the kind of the definition of those microservices, and also how the vendors can help us to kind of go over that kind of the operational learning curve to see what needs to be the granularity of these. How do you orchestrate that? How do you scale them? How do you obviously scale according to the performances required? And I think there are still learnings to be.
Yeah, but what we also see, there's also learning on the side of the vendor, solution vendor. If we talk currently, if I see with our middleware vendor, and he is trying now to decompose his monolithic TV middleware into a microservice architecture, we see all the problems even a vendor has in let's say, engineering that solution so that it is really scalable, robust, and stable, and can be easily maintained in a way. So it's learning cost on both sides.
You're also having legacy.
There's several very interesting aspects in what you're saying now, Randolph, because one thing is, as Ben commented on previously, some 20 years ago, C++ object orientation was the the golden hammer or whatever.
Or service-oriented architecture.
That's
10
years ago.
No, it's coming alive again.
But you still have to be it is difficult. You need to know what you're doing. And even with microservices, right, we'll just cut it up in little pieces. Yes, but what pieces and how do we orchestrate them and how do we do things? And that is not just inherent in the solution.
But I think it's you need learning time in order to which are culminating into best practice experiences. And this is currently not there because we are
And then you need to do it, this is at least what we've tried to do at TDC, building our own microservice-based control plane for this, for our OTT services is where it started, is to take a piecemeal, take the monolithic EPG engine out and replace that, and then we take another part out and replace that. We constantly discover the limits of the architectural, both the microservices, but also the monolithic architecture, because there's always one point of failure which kills everything else. And especially now that you have to debug the multitudes of microservices running, that becomes very complex. So the transition from having a monolithic system or a legacy system to having a fully cloud service out there somewhere system, it requires you to have a lot of monitoring tools. And like that, for looking in God knows how many log files, we had to do a lot of log massaging to figure out what was going on.
Same experience as our...
Look, as vendors, we're not immune to buzzword bingo as vendors either. We've got to deal with the same, except that we probably reflect a lot of it back at you improperly. Look, the fact is, when you internally, when we look at developing a new capability or taking an area of the platform that has some technical debt and refactoring it, design principles are important. Getting and understanding what the attributes of a particular service are. What are the scale? Can we include two in the same one? It's not always necessarily great to break everything up into small atomic units. Sometimes if they have the exact same attributes around scale and peak time usage, all of these things, then maybe it's best just to keep them integrated, because we do have a reduced troubleshooting footprint at that point, because the instrumentation and the analytics and the dashboarding that goes around some of this, it goes somewhere. And if you grow that too large around these microservices, then it becomes untenable. So we, as vendors, we wrestle with that, no question, and we have the same approach to design principles, which should be best practices across all.
You see, the tricky part is once you pick the components into a Docker container, because before that, from the software design, you have to be aware what are the runtime requirements already of the components. So you have to think ahead, and not when you pack it in the container and then discover runtime execution problems.
Absolutely.
This is, I think, key, because also the way you engineer from the software viewpoint these components is different than when you build, let's say, more monolithic solution. It's not just cutting components apart.
I think that's also a key part, actually. I recognize it as well in the conversation that we have with the architecture and the developers, is that compared to maybe 5 years ago, we are much more having conversations about, with me as the product person, about what is the kind of the forecasted scale that we want to achieve. What is it that, how many concurrent streams do we want to have against Horizon Go for a particular market? How many assets are we able to ingest for VOD? How big is the amount of replay channels that we have in EPG? And if you kind of start indexing list those through and really infuse them back into the architectural and operational, the fit for operations type of conversations, then you get indeed to your point, then you get to make conscious decisions about where you keep components together or where you separate components, because you see actually scaling differences that are required. You don't have to scale the EPG in the same way as you have to, for example, scale, I don't know, a VOD delivery request. Yeah.
So one of the other things that we were talking about before was about talking about scaling. We're talking about scale of companies. And you were talking earlier about software as a service solutions, back office solutions, and how they can help small TV companies, and how they can help them compete with large TV companies. How do you do that?
Yeah.
So
that, as I said before, it's kind of fundamental to the value proposition of the service that we provide. So if you look at the type of customers that we have, type of operators that we service, there are some that we have a tier 1 on the platform, but many of them are somewhere between a couple 100,000 homes, somewhere down to, I think one operator has 50 homes. And so an operator that has 50 homes doesn't have the capability of having a robust video product management group and engineering and developers, clearly. And even operators of a reasonable size are starting to look at those parts of their business and understanding that the research and development costs of developing a user experience, middleware, back office, again, that's technical, the tech stack part of video delivery that is under significant pressure, especially in the United States. And so by having a multi-tenant platform that we can amortize those development costs, amortize the research and development costs across all of our operators, it allows us to offer them a price point, again, owner's economics, when they don't own the platform itself. Extending that into customer-owned and managed devices, co-owned devices like Roku's and Fire's and the operator tier of Android, which we're very active in, is another way to allow us to have these best practices around development, use the technologies we're talking about, cloud, which is part of the value proposition, microservices, which allows us to innovate on our operators' behalf and deliver to them, fairly modern services. We talk about some fantastic platform like RDK and X1, but we can accomplish many of those same things, albeit at a lower scale, for operators who really couldn't afford to become a syndicator of that platform.
Okay, I'm going to ask you all about that in a second. But who here is using software as a service solutions? Okay, no one in this room. Who here is a vendor of them? Okay. So what do you, given that you're all at a bigger scale than some of these things, but you're also you were talking about using Pixel, and you're also using other solutions, and you're mixing things with in-house solutions, and you're innovating. You have an innovation team that's then having to work with the production team, and you're all doing things at a different type of scale. How does that fit in?
I think we're all kind of have the same challenges, but we're responding in our own way. I think for us, we obviously also kind of benefit from all the RDK work. We also decided to say, okay, let's in-source innovation. So we also took control more of our own innovation, actually developing software also according to the RDK stack. And for us, it's microservices, cloud, software as a service. I think what we are trying to do is within the ecosystem that's called the back office CP and middleware, we're trying to make sure that for the right kind of services, we pick the right solution. So indeed, Pixel is helping us a great deal on metadata management and on the whole orchestration with entitlements and authentication. But there's maybe other components outside that we decide, say, okay, let's develop them internally, have another supplier. So because of the granularity of these components, it also allows us to be more flexible in terms of bringing out vendors or creating the glue between those vendors ourselves, and therefore not getting into this is a particular supplier for the whole stack type of situation.
And that puts some specific requirements on how that software service is structured. We at CDC last year about this time looked at whether we should stop doing our own infrastructure construction and have everything as a service from one of the well-known vendors out there. And we did some economic modeling on this, and we could see with the same services that we had today, it would actually be about the same, but as the years passed, it would still be cheaper to do it ourselves with the current setup we have in the legacy system and so forth. But the thing that we saw also was as you say, the innovation, the ability to be agile and change things on a whim. Of course, we were assured by this particular vendor that all requests by customers are equal and we will be heard. And we have 1.5 million TV customers, and other customers might have a bit more TV customers, for example. And therefore, we could see that we have had experience from a legacy system that we were not heard as much as others were heard. And therefore, we saw a benefit of doing things ourselves. And at that point, it wasn't quite an option to have, there wasn't an open API from this vendor where we could just build our own stuff and plug it in. But if you do this, and that's what we looked at, we needed to have some, I wouldn't say standards, but some infrastructure rules and guidelines and APIs and somehow to interface with this system. At that point, it was sort of either all or nothing. And that wasn't that alluring to us. I understand if that's for smaller operators, tier 3s, for example, saying, excellent, you take it away. You have a much higher velocity than we can ever have. That was something that wasn't too attractive to us at that point. So it may have changed with various vendors where there's open APIs and everything, but it does require, rather than saying, here's a full head end in a box.
I mean, the question is, what are your strategic rationales for, let's say, changing your production model or really going for full cloud native production model? Because there are several, of course, strategic goals you want to achieve. Of course, one is faster time to market, bringing down cost in operations, automate as much as possible. But I think a very interesting and goal you mentioned already is, of course, fast phase in, fast out of solution components which are connected to certain vendor solutions. Because what we see now, classical in TV, you have a long-standing relationship, usually with a big vendor who is supplying the backbone of your solution in a way. And that has its merits, but also its disadvantages in a way. But on the other hand, before you cross that boundary to that fast phase in, fast phase out, let's say, solution vendor component exchange, you need to be quite assured that the backbone, the base, is running safe, stable, smoothly, scales in a way. But I think that's the interesting aspect that you will see, because if you look currently at the market for classic TV vendors, the choice has become narrower and narrower over time now, especially if you look at classic middleware vendors, very narrow. And I don't like that situation in a way. That's not too much choice, not too much competition in a way. So, but if you have the ability, if you have, let's say, very well developed, scalable, basic, cloud basic production model, then you get more choice also for the solution components. And you can innovate faster that way. And then you can decide on the mix what you do on your own and what you phase in, what you phase out. It's not static. It can change over time in a way. But I think before this happens, this is a long learning curve, a very long learning curve. It will happen only over time. And the other aspect is we also will live for a long time, I think you too, with legacy systems which you can't decompose into microservices. Building system, that will be the fun part in a way. So that the whole production model will still be based on central legacy system, which perhaps in 10 years we might change them in a way, but you still have to phase them into that production model. But which means on the skill set, on the operational side, you will have a very mixed IT staff, because you still will need people operating those aging old IT system, and then you need new people operating the new infrastructure in a way.
Yeah. I totally concur, by the way, what we see, the problem of legacy, and especially when you're kind of having a platform based on this new kind of technology solution, or kind of the microservice in the cloud, you see that you need to find a solution for legacy because otherwise in the operations,
You
my
can't
content
decompose
operations
it.
team has not one CMS, they have a multitude of CMSs. So if you want to put Game of Thrones on a platform, you need to push it to several platforms at one go, each with their own workflow. So I agree is that obviously there's the promised land of kind of being able to consolidate legacy into that environment as well as laid out in the colorful diagrams by Pixel. But it's a kind of a mountain that you need to climb because it's going to be worse before it's getting better.
Absolutely.
So I think that's going to lead us to a closing question. But before that, who here in the audience has a question that they would like an answer to? Because these are the people to ask. No? You're waiting for alcohol? All right. So the obvious thing after that is, with all the legacy, so does that mean that we should all essentially be moving to microservices? Is that move to microservices inevitable, or is it not inevitable? Should we...
Just to be clear, I think it's not only microservices. If you go to a cloud-based native production model, it's 3 foundational layers. It's microservices, containerization, and it's overall orchestration. And these components you have to master and integrate. And the question, for instance, is if you also want flexibility, there's no way around moving away from VNFs to let's say, Docker containers in a way. But if you look at the current state of Docker containers, they have a lot of security, maturity, stableness issues that might be solved, but currently it's a certain risk where you can't put critical services on Docker containers for, let's say, also for legal reasons in a way when you fail. It's more than microservices.
It's just one of the options. Everything in life is a business case. So microservices or cloud or integrating your legacy back office into your new back office, it's just one of the solutions. You can swap legacy, you can leave legacy and accept and embrace it as it is, or manage it, like I said, accept the fact that you're in multiple content workflows at the same time and scale for that on the resource side. But indeed, if there is from the cost-benefit analysis, it proves that you are better off integrating your legacy eventually into that architecture, then that requires a lot of effort as well, and that means that you can do it. But obviously, it's a question of cost-benefit. It's certainly not the only way to deal with legacy, but integrating legacy into this environment is a task in itself.
A challenge, true challenge.
The fact is sometimes the legacy works really well and we make money on it. So, there's reluctance to touch it simply because it's a cash flow thing, right? I mean, one of the large operators in the United States many years ago, probably close to 8 years ago now, recognized the shift to IP would cause fundamental changes in their back office. And so the back office was a bunch of different vendors and systems, but they were effectively monolithic because of the integration points between them. So they began a very thoughtful process of abstracting the boundaries to say, well, let's reduce the problem set so that we have the freedom to go with some new technology implementation within this region of our back office and leave things untouched that really don't need to be touched. There's no reason to make fundamental changes if it's working properly, it has the right attributes, you can talk to it programmatically and scale it. But I think that going forward, new implementations for new features always want to lean on technologies which give us the most flexibility, the most scale, the best economics, all of these things that we know are part of the design principles.
There's no reason to keep building monolithic systems, that's for sure.
Yeah, new ones at least.
So what are all of your top tips then? If you have like 3 top tips about this, what would you tell people to do who are entering into this and dealing with a whole bunch of legacy systems or wanting to deliver something to begin with?
I think I would say that a piecemeal, a stepwise approach takes stuff that can be converted one thing at a time rather than trying to reinvent the entire platform in one go. I don't think many people will do that, but it's been heard of. So one thing at a time, even if it is buying, not developing, but actually buying as a service, see if you can take out one thing at a time to manage the complexity, because it is complex.
Yeah.
So are you okay with an idea of a lift and shift just to get there, and then actually sort of making sure that you then understand how to make it cloud native? Or would you say no to that?
I'd say keep running on whatever's running unless it's burning to the ground. and do the improvements piece while, a bit like the pixel diagram before, saying one step at a time.
I think what we discovered, you have software, you have bare metal, fine. But the most decisive factor is you need people to operate it and deal with it. And so I think start early with the retraining or reskilling of your IT engineers. If you don't have them, all the software is worthless. That's the key part, to have right in time, start the right training. Because currently operating such a complex framework like OpenStack or Kubernetes needs quite some training and experience before you can really put it into large-scale operation. This is our experience. You have to start early, not just when you start to deploy. So,
I think from my point of view, from a customer point of view, they expect reliable and stable products that have short cycle times in terms of innovation. That's what customers expect from us. I think what we need to do, because this is just another way to build your architecture. I think it's nice, but we need to make sure, especially with kind of creating smaller black boxes than we had before, we need to make sure that we design for scale, we design for quality, and we design for operations, to your point. And because this architecture requires an even tighter conversation between the business on one end deciding where this should go and the architect on the other side. Because if you don't design for it, you're going to fail. Yeah.
3 top tips. Number 1, keep your remarks short when you're between happy hour and the rest of the people.
Yeah.
Number 2, prototype. Give yourself the ability to prototype and build and find the mistakes. Find out the stuff you don't want to do, and know your design principles. Spend as much time as possible on the design phase so that you're applying the right tool for the right job.
That's wonderful. I think because there is a bar and people want to get to it, I don't want to take up too much more time. So I would like you all to give a warm round of applause to our wonderful panelists.